You are listening to That Hoarder Overcome Compulsive Hoarding, combating stigma since 2021. I wanted there to be a podcast about hoarding disorder from somebody who hoarded rather than a professional. That didn't exist, so I created it. And that's this podcast that you're listening to now. Subscribe to the podcast and find my social media links, episode transcripts, and every link that I mention at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk. Finally, I am not a doctor. I'm just a hoarder doing her best. So do seek professional support if and when you need it. Hey, how are you? I am doing okay, I think. I'm going to start with a bit of housekeeping, and then I have a success of the week and a weird dilemma of the week. Then I'm going to talk about a woman who sold every item of clothing she owned. And then I have a shout out to a podcast recommendation. So stay tuned for all of that exciting stuff.
Let's start with some housekeeping.
So it is July, and the July issue of the De-Hoarding Darlings update. The De-Hoarding Darlings get an exclusive update from me every month that has things in it like other podcast recommendations, a bit of music, a Spotify de-hoarding playlist, extra questions from guests from the previous month, and a bit of an update from me, that kind of thing. De-Hoarding Darlings get one of those a month, and July's is, as I record, almost ready, so should be up in the next few days. So that's very cool and exciting. The other bit of housekeeping is that the De-Hoarding Accountability Zoom sessions are still happening. They're still going really well. It feels, even though it's different people each time, it feels like a nice sort of community. It feels like a really supportive environment. And thank you to everybody who's been to one. If you would like to come to one, you would be very, very welcome. You sign up at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/ticket. And if you would like to become a De-Hoarding Darling to get access to the thing I mentioned a minute ago, sign up there at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/darling.
It's time for the success of the week and the weird dilemma of the week.
So my success of the week, I usually try and pick something quite specific, but this is a quite general one. I have spent a good few months feeling really stuck with de-hoarding. I've done bits, I've done some, but in particular I've been really struggling with getting rubbish out. I can make decisions about what is rubbish, I just can't get it out of the house. And I know why I've been stuck. I had 2 bereavements and they broke me. But what's really my success of the week is that I am starting to feel like I'm making progress again. I'm starting to be able to actually get rubbish out again. And even though that's more generalised than I'd normally go for in this slot, it really felt worth celebrating. My weird dilemma of the week is a gift I got from a friend. And it was lovely and thoughtful of them to give it me. But I know, having spent some time now trying to understand what I should and shouldn't keep, I know that I shouldn't keep it. It is cute and quirky, but I will never use it. And while it's cute and quirky and I love that they gave it me, I don't love it. So that sounds like, where's the dilemma? You've decided you probably shouldn't keep it. The dilemma is how to get rid of it. Because it's brand new, I can't throw it away. But I'm really fixated on the idea that if I give it to a charity shop, then that friend will go shopping in that charity shop and see it. And because it's a really unusual thing, they will know. They will know that I gave away their gift. I can't re-gift it. It's too specific. I need to donate it. I can't sell it. It's not a valuable thing. I need to donate it because somebody out there will want this very specific quirky thing that I do not want. And something I really took in from the second interview I did with Tracy McCubbin, when I was having a dilemma about a gift that I didn't really like but that meant a lot to me, was she said the fact of them having given it to you and the fact of them having been thoughtful and considerate and giving you a gift doesn't change whether you keep the gift or not. And so I know that this gesture from my friend remains loving and cute and lovely whether or not I keep the thing. And I know that I don't really want to keep the thing, and I can give away the thing without losing that sense that they thought of me and gave it to me. I realised I was overthinking it to a ridiculous degree when I found myself considering driving out of town to donate it to a charity shop somewhere else, and that would be ridiculous. So I guess if you have any thoughts on how to donate this thing that doesn't involve driving to a different town, which would be excessive, then let me know. So, The Woman Who Sold All Her Clothes. Sounds like a fairy tale title, doesn't it? It's not. Ages ago, I was on Facebook and a woman left a comment on a post that has stuck with me ever since. I can't remember what the post was. This was not somebody I knew. I expect it was like a group discussion and she left a comment on that, or maybe a post from one of my friends and so it's one of their friends. And so I saw this comment without knowing who she was. But she said, a few months ago, I realised I was really sick of going to the wardrobe in the morning and not being able to find the thing I wanted to wear. And it was really, really annoying me. So, and this is the bit that blew my mind, I sold all my clothes on Vinted. All my clothes on Vinted and just bought a couple of black bottoms and black tops. And it's great.
What?
You can see why that blew my mind. The ease with which she sold every item of clothing she owned and replaced it with a couple of black things, and that is working for her brilliantly. It was partly the fact of her having done it at all, but partly also the fact that she was so casual about it. And I think there are things we can learn from this. And I also think there are things about it that are not ideal. So I'm going to say from the outset, I am not recommending. This episode does not conclude with me recommending that we all sell every item of clothing we own. You don't need to worry about that. But it does explore some of the thinking around that and some of the feelings I've had in response to it as well. So first of all, what we can learn from the woman who sold all her clothes on Vinted. One thing that we can learn from that is that when you have something that really annoys you, you can take action on it. In the recent episode with Dr. Jan Eppingstall on habituation, we talked a lot about how quickly we adapt to difficult home surroundings and how the longer we live in a hoard, the less you notice. And so you're still constantly inconvenienced by piles of stuff or not being able to find things, but you habituate to it. You just get used to it and it becomes your norm rather than something that you think necessarily, I should fix that. Whereas this woman, faced with a problem that was presumably a kind of ongoing annoyance, she acknowledged this was a problem. It really annoys me when I can't find what I want to wear. And she took action. It may not be action I would take or you would take, but there's something in there about spotting a problem, spotting something that is an ongoing low-level annoyance, and rather than tuning it out, actually taking action. Another thing we can learn from what she did was that it's possible to be very decisive. She didn't half-heartedly sell a couple of bits or donate a couple of bits. She sold the lot. This is annoying me. It can all go. And as somebody who stumbles over every decision and overanalyzes every possible option and can't make a decision in case something is slightly wrong, or can't make a decision because there are too many options, or can't make a decision because I worry about the future, I do admit I feel inspired by how decisive she was. She thought, this annoyed me, she spotted a solution, and she took that solution. I know I need to be more decisive in my life, in my general life, as well as in my dehoarding. I do a lot of prevaricating and a lot of overthinking, and just being reminded that it's possible to be that decisive and follow through on it. Not just go, oh, this is a nightmare, I'm going to sell the lot, and then do nothing about it. That's a good reminder to have, even if, as I said, it wouldn't be the action I would take in that specific situation. Another thing we can learn from is that she found this a really positive experience. She had a problem, she identified a solution, she took action on that solution, and now is thrilled. Every morning, she goes to her wardrobe and picks, I guess, either her black trousers or her black skirt and one of her black tops and puts it on. And, that could save a lot of time every morning. She must face that choice every morning and go, oh, it's so nice that I can just find the thing that I need. She didn't sell all her clothes and now massively regret it. She did something quite dramatic, and it was really, really fulfilling and rewarding for her. And the final thing I think we can learn from what she did is that she is a living example of the fact that we can live life with considerably less, and that that's not a threat to us. She wasn't a hoarder, as far as I know, and certainly with that behaviour doesn't sound like she was. She was a person with an overly full wardrobe, which an awful lot of people are. And she's now got a very sparse wardrobe. And she's living her best life. She's not threatened. She doesn't feel deprived by having considerably less stuff. She feels kind of liberated by it. It's resolved a low-level ongoing stress for her. And she's not feeling the panic of scarcity in the way that I feel even thinking about what she did. And assuming she wasn't a hoarder and she got rid of a lot of stuff and feels good about it, then as hoarders, we could get rid of an awful lot more than she got rid of. And it wouldn't have to be a threat. It wouldn't have to be that panic of scarcity. It wouldn't have to feel like deprivation. She doesn't feel deprived of her previous wardrobe. And this idea that a lot of us feel like we're protecting ourselves with this amount of stuff. And whether that's protecting ourselves from a worry that we'll run out of something, or whether it's protecting ourselves from having to deal with a potential relationship because as long as the house is like this, we can't possibly, or whether it's protecting ourselves from a feeling of emptiness, or whether it's protecting ourselves from any of the things we feel like our hoards protect us from, we can get rid of stuff without that being a threat to our well-being and safety. And I think that is something we can learn from what this woman did. You know what makes this podcast work? It's you, the listeners. The show thrives due to your amazing support. I work hard on it, and all the time and money I invest is worth it because I know that it helps you as well as me. If you want to lend a hand, there are several options that can really, really help. You can make a one-off or recurring donation. You can head to your podcast app and leave a glowing review, or you can do your bit to spread the word. If you know someone who hoards, or if you want your friends and family to understand your hoarding better, send them the link or share the episodes on social media. No matter which you do, you're helping keep that Hoarder Overcome Compulsive Hoarding podcast on the air. Find out how to offer support at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/support. What I would say is less ideal about what she did, there's a couple of things. One is that it's a very extreme thing to do. A lot of us as hoarders are very all or nothing thinkers, and we feel like we've got to do it all or we've got to do none of it. And doing something like this is on one extreme, which just isn't always the healthiest or best way of doing things. Now, for her, it worked out great. For a lot of other people, it might be that they'd sold 3/4 of their clothes, or that they'd sold half of their clothes. And that would have been just as liberating, and that would have been just as pleasing on an ongoing basis. There's a danger in thinking we have to do one extreme or the other extreme, and there's no value in anything in between. Not least because if we want to get out of hoarding thinking, it can be really important to remove ourselves from that all or nothing thinking. The other thing that struck me as not ideal with her course of action is that it can lead to you believing that taking small actions is not enough, or that it's not worth bothering to do the little bit in front of you. And everything I know and everything I learn tells me that the answer is nearly always an accumulation of small actions rather than a couple of big grand gestures. One of my earlier episodes with Jan was about tiny habits and how much more successful people are at building tiny habits than doing grand gestures on an ongoing basis. And a big bit of what we have to learn to do is incorporate our new de-hoarding behaviours into our life rather than throw ourselves into it for a bit and then do nothing for ages. And with a giant task like de-hoarding a home, doing it as a series of small actions feels more manageable, it's less overwhelming, it's more consistent so you can keep making progress. And the more we do that, the more we prove to ourselves that it is worth bothering with the little bits and that it doesn't have to be all grand gestures. In the last accountability Zoom session, we were talking about how we often feel with that perfectionist tendency of, oh, there's no point doing a bit. If I can't do it all, there's no point. Or if I can't do it perfectly, there's no point. And yet we got together and spent an hour and a half doing it, and actually we're all really pleased with how much we've managed in an hour and a half. And that hour and a half was really worth it. But it took having some kind of external accountability to make us all sit down and do it. And if we are stuck in the thinking that what's the point in doing 10 minutes, or what's the point in doing an hour, or what's the point in working on it for 3 hours or 15 minutes or whatever your time slot is, how much difference can I really make when I look at the vastness of the problem and all of that kind of thinking? We end up often just thinking and doing nothing at all. Whereas doing a bit and then doing a bit more and then doing a bit more and then doing a bit more is what actually creates lasting change. And if you're a hoarder and everything that currently feels like a cushion against the big, bad, dangerous world is ripped away in one go, that can lead to massively overcompensating and filling your house up faster than you knew possible. Whereas doing it bit by bit, doing it gradually, tends to be the way that our brain can get used to it, and our soul, or whatever it is that needs to feel safe, can get used to it and adapt. So the big dramatic session of selling everything you own might solve part of the problem, or it might look like it's solved the problem, but it might be harder to keep that going for the rest of your life. And so this kind of action, while I'm absolutely clear it worked for her, I assume she doesn't hoard. You know, if you're listening and feeling the urge to sell everything in your wardrobe, I'm not stopping you. If that feels like what you need to do, then do it. Trust your own judgment. But if you hear that story and say, see, that means there's no point me throwing away one ripped t-shirt, that's the wrong message. And that's where that kind of approach can cause us to trip up, because by feeding into the all or nothing thinking and starting to believe that little bits aren't worth bothering with, we just get stucker than ever. So shout out this week to a podcast called Conversations with Carolyn Spring. Carolyn Spring is a very interesting woman who talks about trauma. And have a listen to what she says here about life being hard, and in particular, the bit about the secondary wave of shame. Have a listen.
So that's the reality. Life is hard, and sometimes you get hit by a wave of the pain of that. To be really clear, let me reiterate, I do not waft through life on a magic carpet of calm. Life is hard, and I feel the hardness, and sometimes it gets on top of me. I think that's normal. I think that's what happens to most people. And what I've had to learn to do is exactly that, to recognise that it's normal, that it happens to most people, that it's not just me, that it's part of the human condition to be flooded by these feelings of overwhelm and impossibility, or anger and rage and outrage, and the injustice of it all. Or to feel like all the energy and all the fight in you has suddenly been sucked out of you, and there's nothing inside with which to fight anymore. It's normal. There's nothing wrong with me for feeling like that. I'm not mad, I'm not bad, I'm not anything other than a human being reacting as human beings react. The big difference in me to a few years ago is that I don't beat myself up for it. I don't sink under a secondary wave of shame that I'm having these feelings. I just have the primary feelings and let them be, and I don't react to them by beating myself up for having them. Certainly, I grew up believing that feelings were bad, not least because I was repeatedly punished and shamed and even rejected for having them. But I don't believe it anymore. They're just feelings. Nothing bad about them. They're neutral. They're just telling me in that moment that life is hard and that I'm running low on capacity to deal with the hardness of it.
Now that really spoke to me when I heard it, and I will link to Conversations with Carolyn Spring in the show notes so you can check out her podcast if you want to. Okay, thank you for listening, and I will speak to you next time. Thank you for listening to That Hoarder Overcome Compulsive Hoarding podcast. It's been a pleasure to have you on board. You can find all the links I've mentioned and a transcript of the episode online at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk. To find out more about how you can support this podcast and the overall project, go to overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/support and do subscribe to the podcast so you make sure you don't miss any future episodes. There may be links in this podcast that earn me money. This doesn't come at any extra cost to you if you make a purchase through those links, and it helps to support the podcast.